So welcome to the last of my series of tier list videos for season 1 of Dragonflight. This video, we're going to be going over DPS rankings for M+. I'll be giving my thoughts on all of the DPS rankings here before you. Everything in NA is just a healer or tank I've already covered. Before we get into it, a few things though. One, if you're watching this, you're not subscribed and you enjoy it, hit the sub button. It really helps me out. Tons of great content coming in Dragonflight. Two, at the end of the day, this is a game. Play what you want and have fun. Player skill does make up for a big amount of things in this game. So even if you're playing a class that I personally think is a little bit weaker than another class, if you're comfortable on it, you can do very well. Lastly, everything in the tier, I'm ranking at kind of the same level. So there's not really a ranking within the tier. I think WoW is too complex to really do that. But classes that are in S and A are generally more powerful in the hands of players with equal skill levels than those in B and C. But again, it's a game. Anything can happen. You can play whatever you want and do well in it. All these classes can get KSM or Keystone Hero or all 20s timed or anything they want in the game. It's all up to whatever you want to do. But at the end of the day, have fun with it. That being said, we're going to rank them. Again, leaning more towards higher keys here. Stuff at lower keys and in different keys can be ranked differently based on pull sizes or how long pulls are lasting. But out of the way, we'll get into it. Start with S tier. First class up in S is going to be Havoc. Havoc has some of the best DPS profiles across the board this season. It features a really strong burst and cleave on a pack-to-pack basis, while also being able to do really good single target and priority damage. They're incredibly tanky, have the ability to talent into a stun or an immunity at a slight loss of damage, and they have decent enough mob control. I think that's probably their biggest weakness, as they really only have Imprison, which isn't too useful in a lot of dungeons. They have an AoE stun, which is quite good, and they have Sigil of Misery, which itself isn't too great. Overall, though, I think Havoc is one of the best classes for M+ this season and deserves an S tier. Next, we're going to put Outlaw up in S tier. Outlaw is the king of 5 to 8 target cleave, while keeping incredibly strong single target thanks to Blade Fury. They have damage for every scenario. They have great utility with their poisons. They have insane mob control. They're really durable. They can help with skips. They really can do it all. They drop off and pulls over 10 targets, but the rest of the kit is strong enough to outpace this and deserves an S tier. Next up, Windwalker. Windwalker has insane burst that's almost unparalleled, bringing both really strong AoE and single target burst in dungeons. They have a ton of ways of stopping and controlling packs, are super durable with 4 defensives, are highly mobile, and bring 3 really nice utility buffs, that being Mystic Touch, Close to Heart, and Generous Pour. Windwalker easily fits into so many compositions and deserves an S tier. Last up in S is going to be Demonology. Now, Demo is probably the best range class for this tier, and brings with it a really great burst and consistent AoE profile. While their damage is really good in AoE, they're quite tanky and bring really good utility in curses, fears, stuns, healthstones, B-res, and a gateway. In all honesty though, I do think that their damage isn't enough to warrant an S tier on alone. I think that would be an A, but because they're the best range, and I do think there's going to be a little bit melee unfriendly mechanics in these dungeons, I do think that as the best range, they do deserve going up into S tier, so that's where they are. We're going to move down to A tier now. I'm going to put Feral up in A. So Feral is one of those classes that's been in a great state right now that has been a long time, and I could easily see it moving up to S. There's a few reasons why I ranked it down in A, which I'll get into. So really, they have insane AoE and consistent and burst AoE damage now. It's really good. One of the downsides for them is going to be a little bit of their single target. When they spec into that full AoE, their single target does drop a little bit. But their biggest issue is just going to be the survivability. Now, I know like Bark Skin, Survival Instincts, and Bear might seem like really good, but outside of those things, they are very squishy. And there's going to be a lot of damage in higher keys. Keys are dealing a lot of damage to people right now. So I think that because of that, Feral falls a little bit outside of the S tier, but their damage is so good that I can possibly see them moving up at breaking into the S tier. Really happy for them. Let's go Feral. Unholy DK is going to join Feral up in the A tier. Unholy does crazy damage the more targets are present, having some of the largest bursts for large target counts in the game. In smallish pulls, their damage isn't anything as crazy. They don't do those big numbers. They suffer a lot if you're not being pulled around, losing out a ton of potential damage if you're in a less coordinated group. However, in those coordinated groups and in those keys where you're able to pull around and Unholy DK's cooldowns, they do crazy damage, and you can possibly see them ending up in the S tier, but because they're kind of conditional, so to speak, I believe A tier is more right for them. We're going to put Ret Paladin up in A tier as well. Ret Paladin has some of the highest burst damage inside their cooldowns, dealing a ton of damage with their 2 and 1 minute cooldowns. However, outside of those 1 and 2 minute cooldowns, they suffer a significant drop off in terms of damage. They bring a great suite of utility, including a newly added B-Revs, but suffer a bit in terms of defensives and mobility outside of their bubble. I think Retribution is incredibly strong, but because of these downfalls I mentioned, it keeps them out of the S tier for now. Next up, Enhancement Shaman, going to go up in the A tier. Enhancement has probably the best priority target damage of any of the classes I've talked about so far, while keeping a strong, consistent damage profile. They bring some strong AoE control with a knockup and some stuns, the best interrupt in the game, and Wind Fury Totem. They're also the best class to bring Lust, which is a nice positive in this meta. Enhancement has nothing really going against it, it just lacks some of the high damage or incredible defensives that the S tier classes do, and thus hits an A tier. We're going to put Subtlety Rogue up in A tier as well. Sub features great burst damage, one of the best defensives in the game, insane utility, mob control, and the ability to help with skips. Basically, the whole Rogue suite. Their main detriment right now is their damage outside of cooldowns, as well as its mediocre single target damage. A recent nerf to Black Powder also hurts the spec. However, I still believe it is overall strong and is up in the A tier. We put the new kid on the block, Devastation Evoker, up in A tier as well. It starts its first ever tier in a great spot, honestly, with incredibly high burst damage on pull, as well as great mobility, defensives, utility, and a Lust, probably the second best class to bring it. Devastation looks to be one of the best caster specs for the upcoming tier, and is only really held back by slightly subpar single target and prio damage, as well as lower damage as pulls drag on. We're going to put Arms up in the A tier as well. I'm going to slot Fury in here and kind of talk them together. Arms and Fury are basically two sides of the same coin right now. They do almost the same thing. Arms has more of an execute niche. Fury has more of a 3 to 5 target cleave niche. But all their damage is really front-loaded burst. They do a lot of it at once, which is really, really good. And then they also have pretty decent utility in the form of Battle Shout and the health buff one, Rallying Cry, that's what it is. Those are very good. Now, they are diminished a little bit because Prot Warrior is probably going to be so powerful. But I think that their bursty damage profile does deserve them up in an A tier. Their single target and their sustain is a little bit less when they have this profile. That's why I think they're down in A tier. But I do think both of them are very, very good, and it'll be interesting to see which one ends up better. Our last class in A tier, we're going to put Frost Mage up here. Now, Frost Mage is up here not because of their damage, but because of the large amount of value and utility they give to a dungeon overall. They're incredibly survivable. They bring a really short AoE stop in Dragon's Breath. They have a perma 60% slow to allow kiting, which is going to be very useful, especially with the 10% tank nerfs, which is going to be really, really strong. They're also probably the third best option to bring Lust, which, as a ranged, is really, really good. So, second best range because of Devoker, third best overall because of Enhancement Shaman. But realistically, I think that this is enough to give them an A tier warrant. Even though their damage is maybe a little bit subpar, they end up doing pretty decent enough damage overall anyways, and they have really great utility, so A tier it is for them. Moving down to B tier now, we're going to put Ellie Shaman. Ellie Shaman is really fun, in my opinion. They have great utility and mobility, they have a Lust, and their AoE profile is that of really consistent damage with some burst windows. I think the big downside they have right now, while in dungeons, is going to be their single target, which suffers when talenting into AoE dungeon talents. It's going to be really big, because there's going to be a lot of really tough bosses and tyrannical weeks, but in a dungeon where, maybe the bosses aren't as hard, or in a fortified week, I can definitely see them moving up. Likewise, while their defensives have increased, they are still overall squishy, and I think they belong down in B tier because of that. We're going to put Assassination Rogue up in B tier as well. Assassination has incredible defensives and mob control options, including a very short cooldown AoE silence. The biggest issue with them is just their damage. After eating nerfs to compensate for single target, their AoE has fallen a little behind and is pretty mediocre. With a buff to this, you can very easily see them rising up above B tier, but for now, I'm going to keep them in B. Joining Ass, we're going to have Fire Mage. So Fire has been consistently a strong M+ spec in the past, and the tools to do so are again there. The biggest issue right now is the availability of their unique CC in the past to the other Mage specs and their poorer tuning. What I mean by that is that in the past, Fire Mage was incredibly strong because of stuff like Dragon's Breath. However, Dragon's Breath ate a nerf and then was given to the other Mage specs, removing that from Fire's unique toolkit. While recent buffs have brought up their damage considerably, I do think they're stuck in the B tier for now, but I could see them rising given the right circumstances or changes. Next up, we're going to put Marksmanship Hunter. Now, Marksmanship is a big thing here. This is probably going to be my most unknown of all these things, because Marksmanship during all M+ testing was just absolute garbage, really, really bad, just so poorly undertuned. However, they got a lot of buffs recently, and I do think that their burst profile is actually really good. So the recent buffs to them have really moved it up in terms of damage. 3 to 5 target cleave is their niche, and it's really strong at that. I think their weaknesses are still there. They have low consistent damage at the end of the pack. It's very front-loaded like a warrior. And a lot of their damage is capped, except for Explosive Shot, Volley, and Wailing Arrow, which limits the utility in larger pulls. They also lack some single target damage when they grab a lot of their AoE talents, and they're really, really squishy, kind of suffering from what I like to call the Hunter problem. Hunters in dungeons still not very survivable, even though they've made strides to improve that. I really love this spec. I think I'm going to put it in B tier for now. I could see it riding up to A because its burst damage is very useful, and it is going to be kind of a monster in lower keys, but I'm a little bit worried about its viability in higher keys due to its survivability issues and some of that damage after the initial burst opens up. But Marksmanship, very fun. I'm glad it's got buffed and moved up here. We'll see how it ends up. This is probably my most unknown pick. Next, we're going to grab Shadow Priest. Shadow gains a ton of value the longer mobs live, having a strong, consistent damage profile, as well as very strong utility in dungeon. Unfortunately, a consistent profile is not really what's wanted in an M+ environment. You want kind of both. You want some burst, and then you don't want to be like dead outside your cooldowns. They don't really have anything on the burst side. They have more of their outside of the cooldowns. You want a good mix of it. They don't have that. They also bring a really long kick CD, which kind of hinders your group in mob control, They have a lack of mobility and are just generally less damaging than specs above them, which I think warrants them a B tier placement. Next up, BM Hunter is going to go up in B tier as well. BM has really strong consistent cleave, decent single target, and can do priority damage all while doing AoE. I might be undervaluing BM here a little bit. They're a range spec that has decent enough survivability because of their pet leech. They're all right. They have really good mobility. I think really a lot of the nerfs have come in recently, and because of their lack of burst damage and the relative squishiness, it has me hesitant to place them higher, especially in this meta where burst and survivability really seem to be king. But I do think that they could probably end up rising up the ranks as well. So right now, I'll keep them B, but we'll see later where they actually end up. Next, we're going to grab Affliction Warlock. Ooh, down in B tier. So Affliction Warlock is one of those specs that is really, really good at one specific thing, and that is AoE damage. So with their seed build and M+, they bring a really respectable AoE damage profile with great utility and survivability. Their biggest issues is that talent tree, which locks them into either AoE damage and no single target, or a single target damage and no AoE. And that's not really a great place you want to be. There's a lot of cases where there's one mob you need to burst down first in a pack, like a priority target or a really hard single target boss. That kind of leave them a little bit weak. Additionally to that, outside of their cooldowns, their damage is pretty lower, which is pretty detrimental to your class overall. The weaknesses don't quite make up for its benefits, so I think it deserves to sit down in B tier. We're going to put Survival up in B tier as well. Survival has an amazing 4-7 target cleave with the likes of Butchery. Unfortunately, Wildfire Bomb is just really undertuned at the moment, as is their single target. With this, as well as being a melee and suffering from the general hunter problem of squishiness, although it's not as bad as Marksmanship because they can get a pet, I think B tier is a safe ranking for this spec, but if buffs come in, I really could see it rising up the rankings and Year of the Spear happening again. The last spec in B tier, we're going to put Arcane Mage. So Arcane Mage is able to get off their burst. They have some of the highest single target and low target count, which is 4 to 6 targets in this case, burst in the game. However, outside of those moments, they do almost nothing in terms of damage. This is primarily their biggest issue and the reason why I think they belong down in B tier, but they could move up if that specific burst profile is required. We're on to C tier now, and really, just before I talk about the class individually, I think the issue with the class in C tier is they're just really undertuned compared to the other ones. They have the options and they have those tools there, but the tuning has just left them kind of in the dust. The first one is going to be Balance. Now, Balance, like I said, has a really strong toolkit for Mythic Plus, but unfortunately, a long string of nerfs at the end of beta have just brought them down really far below the average of what you want. That and their super long ramp-up time of around 40 seconds to do full damage leave them not being in a great spot in M+, and really deserving of some buffs. Destro is going to join them down in C tier. Destro can do decent enough single target and cleave damage, but unfortunately their AoE damage is incredibly below average. When they have Infernal up, they can do alright damage, but even during that, and outside of it, their AoE is just so poor that I have to give them a C tier ranking and hope for some buffs. Lastly, Frost Death Knight. Frost DK is a 2-target king, with their damage being mostly upfront burst. However, 2-target fights are very uncommon in Mythic Plus, especially this season. Outside of that, their damage doesn't appear to be tuned properly to compete with the rest of the specs in M+. They have some game in smaller pull sizes and lower keys, but scaling up pull sizes and key levels leaves them in the dust and warrants a C tier ranking. Hopefully, they will see some buffs. So, these are my rankings for the specs for M+ in Season 1. Now again, there's a few I'm probably a little bit wrong about. I do think maybe some of the Hunter specs I'm undervaluing. Maybe I'm overvaluing Demonology a little bit. But we'll see what ends up happening. I'm pretty comfortable with a lot of my picks here. I do think that, not having M+ testing, since a lot of these nerfs or buffs leaves us in a little bit of a speculative place, but I think this is a pretty good starting point for going into the season. I'm excited for this season. I'm really going to have so much fun in M+. It's going to be so good. If you liked the video, though, leave a like, drop a comment down below about how I thought about it, what you think, how I did, how do you think I'm wrong, think I'm right, that kind of stuff. If you enjoyed it, hit the sub button, really helped me out. But that's it for the video today. Thanks for watching. Peace.